And that seems nuts to some people, crazy. I used to think that way. So if you're here this morning and you're thinking, really? I mean, I can see what you're saying about evolution, but the idea that things are only thousands of years, the world surely is far greater. I get that. But I want to show you that actually there's a lot of science on the side of thousands of years, and there's a lot of biblical reasoning which we should take seriously. People ask lots of questions because they see the rocks. The deep time is, they think, inherent within the rocks. You just even look at Grand Canyon, you think, well, surely a long time and gradual processes and a little bit of water gradually they lay down this layer, then this layer, then this layer, not just at Grand Canyon, but all over the world. But maybe you stood on the canyon side and you say, well, do you know what? I believe in Noah's flood, so I think a lot of water in a very short time did the same geological work, laying down those rocks and then carving the canyon. Is seeing believing? You imagine two geologists standing on the Grand Canyon, and they both, one is a long ager and one's a person who believes in Noah's flood. And then, after a time, the long ager comes in line with the young ager. He's now come to see, probably he's a Christian already, but he's come to see that actually, I think Noah's flood explains this. And this is his statement to his friend, who was a young earth creation saw long. He said, you know, Jim, I wouldn't have seen it unless I'd believed it. In other words, believing, taking God at his word, taking that straightforward framework literally helped him to have the right interpretation of what he was looking at. So come with me and think about this. Many questions on this issue. Does the age of the earth even matter? Well, on one level, no. But does it have any theological implications? Well, think about that. Isn't it just a side issue? Do you know what I find interesting? Many people say that, but they're all on the other side of the argument. They say it's a side issue, but they believe in millions of years. Some people say, surely fossils are proof of the billions of years. Some people say, what about dating methods like carbon dating? Some people say, you're really telling me that real PhD scientists believe in the Bible, believe in creation, believe it's a flood story and so on? What's it got to do with the gospel? Surely the Bible's silent on the issue of the age. It doesn't tell us how the heavens go. It just tells us why they're here. What about distant starlight in the young universe, just thousands of years old? Could Adam have looked up and seen Orion, the constellation Orion, and the constellation Pleiades, and Arcturus, the great bear? Could he have seen the constellations? How is that possible if he was only arriving on the planet a couple of days after God had made the stars? There's lots of questions. By the way, the short answer to that is God's a God of miracles. I could give you lots and lots of information about, you know, different theories that creation-believing scientists have had as physicists. Some of them involve anisotropic time. Some of them involve cosmological special relativity. Some of them involve gravitational time dilation. I hardly even understand the words I'm using. And they're interesting theories. I've read some of them. I've endorsed some of those books. But I generally today would say Creation Week is from start to finish a series of miracles. By definition, miracles have no explanation, and you cannot explain them. Every Christian that I know is a believing Christian says, I believe Jesus turned water into wine. I believe Moses parted the Red Sea. I believe that Elisha made an axe head float. I believe that Jesus used a boy's lunch to feed thousands of people, etc., etc. By faith, I don't need a science explanation. Why is it any different with creation? If God had made everything in an instant like that, we wouldn't probably be asking that question. But because he chose to string it out over a week, we say, I wonder what's going on there. How did he do it? Well, it's just a series of miracles. So starlight in star systems that are literally billions of light years from us, that's a distance, not a time measurement. Yes, I believe it. I believe the distances are real. I don't need an explanation. That's not a cop-out. It's believing in miracles. And so, friends, I can't answer all your questions, but I want to say to you that time is not always what we think. Things are not always what they seem. Let me show you that with Grandpa's axe. Imagine you're on your grandpa's knee. Some of you, that's a long time ago. And he's got this big axe, and you're impressed with it. Maybe you're 5, and you say, Grandpa. You ask questions about the axe, and he says it belonged to his great, many greats grandpa. and your eyes go wide as a youngster, and you say, how old is it? He says it's 300 years old, and to you even 10 years is old. 300 years is like, beyond belief. Then he says something a bit puzzling. Do you know, in the time since my grandfather bought it, it's had 6 new axe heads and 12 new axe handles. How old is it? Our bodies are like that. Have you ever thought of that? I think it stands to reason. No one here looks anything like they did on their birthday. Yeah? Your bodies are constantly being recycled. Your intestinal lining is about 4 or 5 days old. It's constantly being worn away and sloughed off, and it needs to be replaced as cells divide. Some of your blood cells are maybe half a year old. All of your different cells have different lifespans, as any medical person could tell you. When you're young, say a teenager, your bony skeleton is being replaced and recycled approximately every 8 years, apart from a few stem cells. You're constantly being remade. No one looks like they did at their birthday. Things to do with age are not always what they seem. You could have a person up here with a very serious and sad condition called progeria. He might look 70, but he could be only 16 years old. But he's got a wasting, accelerated aging condition because of a genetic abnormality that makes him look old. The usual indicators of age are broken down. You see, when we come to look at things to do with the earth, we don't have the same experience as things to do with human beings. You and I, if we live for decades, have got an experience of a data set of thousands upon thousands of people who are 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. So you can have a pretty good idea how old people are. But how many experiences have you had of canyon formation? So how old is a canyon? You've never seen one form. You see what I'm saying? You have no data set at all. You have to take someone's word for it. And so do I. Everything in the world is like that. Age is not always what it seems. Come with me then as I challenge us to think about how science often says no to the deep time, billions of years. You might think, some people might think that's an audacious claim, that this is tantamount to hiding your head in the sand like the proverbial ostrich. They don't actually do that, by the way, but that's the idea. Don't confuse me with the facts. I'm happy with my blind belief, my Christian faith. I don't want you to confuse me with science. That's the way I think some people think. You've had your brain removed. Everything I'm going to show you, plus stacks of other talks that colleagues of mine, like Peter LaRue, who's at the back, and others around the world, our colleagues, will present these sort of evidences. And over the years, many hundreds, probably thousands of these evidences have been presented in our magazine. There are actually hundreds of physical processes, and I don't exaggerate, hundreds of physical processes that you could use as a kind of clock to assess how long something's been happening, the age of something. These give you maximum time spans for things. So, for example, if you looked at the amount of salt in the oceans and you assumed that the oceans had started out as almost like distilled water with no salt, you looked at the processes that add salt and the processes that remove salt from the oceans, and you are conservative about that. You make it harder on the people who believe in a young earth, and you say, how long has that been happening? You might come up with 62 million years. And you might say to me, Philip, that's way beyond the age of Scripture. Yes, it is. But it's way too short for the 3.8 billion years for the age of the oceans that we are told. Even with the most generous assumptions, that's a massive contradiction of the billions of years time frame for the oceans. And we could do that with many things. Let me just take a handful of things with you this morning. Comets disintegrate too quickly. Tightly folded rocks form very quickly. They must form quickly. Well-preserved fossils defy long ages. And dinosaurs, I'm going to give you evidence they lived in recent historic times. You may have heard of some of this before if you've come to creation events. Am I cherry-picking the evidence? Of course I am. Because there's hundreds of things I could share. I have to. But I'm not picking these because they're the only things. I'm just picking a few that frankly keep myself interested, because there's so many things. Comets, sometimes called dirty snowballs. I'm going to do this really quickly because you've had a lot of teaching already this morning. Sometimes we'd spend more time explaining this. But comets are material that's dust and it's ices. This is not necessarily water ice. It could be dry ice like carbon dioxide and other material that's different elements that are ice. And as these, on their very elongated orbits, come around the sun's solar wind causes material to be blown off. And use the word blow, very lightly. It sublimates. It goes from a solid straight to a vapor. You see that as this white tail, and also ions are given off. In this case, this 1997 comet Hale-Bopp had a blue ion tail as well. This is not the direction of movement. It's not moving from right to left in the picture. The sun is at the left-hand side, okay? The solar wind is there. Here is a graphic of a comet coming around the sun. And every pass around the sun, when it comes near, it loses 5 to 10% of its mass through solar radiation, blowing, in inverted commas, the material off the comet. That's a big deal because it means that some short period comets, they have a period of orbit that's every 200 years or less, like Halley's Comet was about 75 years. The one I've just showed you, that's every 2,400 years. We're not going to see that again. I suspect the law will have come a long time before. Anyway, a long period comet, maximum lifespan about 100,000 years. A short period comet, maximum lifespan 10,000 years. If the solar system is 4.6 billion years old, how come we still have comets? But there must be some, because they would have long since disappeared. They would have disintegrated far too quickly. So they've hypothesized a long time ago that there's this big shell, this big sphere on the outer distant parts of the solar system of cometary-sized objects called Oort's cloud. Oort's cloud, named by Jan Oort, a Dutch astronomer. It's hypothetical. No one's ever seen it. You can't see it. You can't even see it with the current best space telescope, the James Webb. You've got no chance because the objects are way too small. Many scientific papers are written each year about the Oort cloud, its properties, its origin, its evolution. Yet there is not a shred of direct observational evidence for its existence, said Carl Sagan, the late Carl Sagan, an atheist astronomer. Now, that means that it's an imaginary cloud of comets. It's a rescue device to try and explain how we can still have comets. The idea is that gravity of a passing star from time to time would dislodge one of these objects in this imaginary cloud. This ends up coming into an orbit around the sun. Maybe the gravity of Jupiter helps entrap it in an orbit around the sun, and you have comets. But no one's ever seen it. They've written PhDs on the Oort cloud, but no one's ever seen it. That's not scientific evidence. That's a rescue device to explain why, in a solar system we believe to be 4.6 billion years old, we've still got comets. How far away is that? Well, the distance between the Earth and the sun is 1 astronomical unit, about 150 million kilometers. The Oort cloud, that blue shell in this picture, is 10,000 times further away. Now, there is a belt of objects that's real and is observed. It's called the Kuiper Belt, named after another Dutch astronomer. And that does contain objects that some people think could be comets. But the total mass of all the objects in that Kuiper Belt, sometimes called trans-Neptunian objects because they're beyond the orbit of Neptune, the total mass of all those objects is less than the mass of our moon. It includes the old planet Pluto, now relegated to a dwarf planet, plus Sedna and Eris and other objects. It itself could not be the source of comets. It would have long been exhausted unless you had it being replenished from time to time by the Oort cloud. In other words, the Kuiper Belt would have long since gone if it was a source of comets without the Oort cloud replenishing it. So this evidence is evidence for a young solar system of thousands of years. Unless you have the Oort cloud, which is imagined, which is a rescue device, the actual facts point to a solar system that can't be more than 10,000 years old because there's short period comets still in our solar system. Evidence number 2. I'm rattling through these. Tightly folded rocks must form quickly. There's a big layer of sandstone across the whole North American continent. It stretches from Mexico up to towards Alaska, right across to Newfoundland and northern Greenland, east and west coasts. In the area near the Grand Canyon, it's labeled the Topete sandstone, but lithographically, in other words, its geological makeup, it's identical pretty much to sandstones across that whole region. At the base of the Grand Canyon, At the lowest lying flat layer of the Grand Canyon, you can see the Tapeats sandstone. And that runs for well over 400 kilometers as a flat lying layer. At its base, it's an erosional surface. There are things the size of house-sized boulders in it. This represents a massive erosional event. When you go to Grand Canyon, has anyone been? You have to drive up to an upper plateau country called the Kaibab Upwarp, and then you will go and look down into the Grand Canyon. That's been uplifted, that Kaibab Upwarp, that plateau, about 1.6 kilometers above the other rocks of that part of the US. And at the edges, you've got single arm folds called monoclines. And this is the monocline, part of the monocline that shows the Tapeats sandstone. There's a man for scale, if you can see the sort of towards the bottom right of the picture. You can see folds, but they are, if you remove the overburden and the sort of rocks on the surface, they are not cracked. You see folded mountains all over the world. Technically, we call this an orogeny, a mountain building period in geology. Often, you don't see faults and cracks. You see things that look like plasticine has been folded. I remember in 1987 doing some geological fieldwork with the university I was with. I was a long ager at the time. I think I was not an evolutionist, but I was still a believer in millions of years. And I saw this layer of rock. It's not a very good photograph because I took it with one of those old cameras from, nearly, whatever that was, nearly 40 years ago. And I was impressed by this overthrust, as were all of us geology students. Imagine the energies involved. But what is interesting about that is there's no cracking. Look at the angle. I picked up this in the same field trip, and I was puzzled. How do you explain this folding? People say, well, the way to explain it is under deep pressure, deep burial, and some temperature, the rocks can behave in a plastic way. Not so. That's called metamorphism. If you metamorphose a sandstone, you have a quartzite, totally different physical and chemical characteristics. If you metamorphose a shale or a mudstone, you get a slate that you can put on your roofs, totally different physical and chemical characteristics. And if you metamorphose something like a limestone, you have a marble that might be useful for your worktop. The chemistry is changed. The physical characteristics are utterly different. And any fossils inside are almost always obliterated with metamorphic processes. So when you find fossils, it's a sedimentary rock. And when you find folds, there cannot have been significant heat and pressure. And that means the only explanation that makes sense is it was soft when it was folded. That means the timescales for laying down these things and then folding them must have been very short, so that the lithofaction, the turning to stone, hadn't taken place. It's days, weeks, months at most to lay down these rocks and then fold them, and then they set hard. This is very strong evidence. You might say, well, Philip, what do evolutionary geologists say? They smile. I have had professional geologists attend a talk or two of mine, and I had this out with them, and they literally stood there and smiled. They did not know. They have no answer. It's a very powerful evidence. Now, fossils you find in these rocks challenge the idea of long ages. I won't labor this because you've already had something on this in the last talk, but let me give you a few more examples. This is ribs, and poking through the ribs, scales and skin of a dinosaur found in Queensland, Australia, I think it was. Brilliant preservation. How do you get brilliant preservation? You need to bury it quickly so that rot and decay doesn't set in and scavengers come along and eat the carcass. Charles Darwin hypothesized, he said, you won't find any wholly soft-bodied creatures preserved. But we do find wholly soft-bodied creatures preserved, such as this octopus fossil, one of several found in, Lebanon, 95 million years ago. Sorry, it wasn't found in Lebanon 95 million years ago. It was found in Lebanon about 10 years ago and said to be 95 million years old. Okay. All the 8 tentacles, the suckers, traces of gills and traces of other bits of soft tissue and ink in the ink sac. And they took the ink, and this is now a standard clever thing to do. Take the ink, reconstitute it with water, and use a fountain pen to draw the creature from which the ink came. I've seen many examples of this in the publications now. It's quite fun. They take a cuttlefish and they take they've got ink from that cuttlefish fossil said to be millions of years old. They do the same with octopus or octopuses, I'm not sure which it is. And they draw the creature with its own ink. And by the way, in these same fossils, and I think this is fascinating, 95 million year old ink with melanin, basically the same kind of pigment that you have in your skin if you've got dark skin or dark hair. And they sequenced the amino acids of this melanin. It was identical to modern octopus. Not even one single letter difference. That's just ridiculous to think that it's 95 million years old. We're discovering, and I won't read this whole quote, but we're discovering things, organic materials like, in this case, quinones, as you look further down this quotation. We're finding colors. We're finding all sorts of astonishingly preserved creatures. In this case, they're supposed to be 350 million years old. And you've got sequenceable proteins and pigments. That makes no sense. It just defies the long ages. And linked to that, you may be, just out of interest, how many of you have heard of the idea of dinosaur soft tissue? Yeah, not many of you. You see, this has been known since 20 years ago. This is pictures published in the Senior Journal Science 20 years ago. One whole year after this was published, and it wasn't done in a corner. It's in the top journal Science. I was invited to speak by a very open-minded professor, not a Christian, not a creationist, to his master's degree students at the University of Leiden. That's like an Oxford or Cambridge or Stellenbosch of the Netherlands. And they weren't too happy sitting there listening to me, but he thought it was good for them to hear a person who brought a different point of view. Good for him. And you know, not a single one of those master's level students, 1 year on, it was March 2006, and it was a year after this publication, not one of them had heard of it. And I was in the Department of Vertebrate Paleontology. That was the department where they should have known about this. People are incredibly out of date in their own fields. This is powerful evidence. Stretchable material. Blood vessels you could squeeze with forceps or tweezers, and out comes liquid blood. In a mummified state, this was a thigh bone of a Tyrannosaurus rex found in Montana in the Hell Creek Formation. As soon as you break bones out of that rock, it starts to smell cadaverous, like dead things, because it starts to decay. Jack Horner, who is the leader of the team that did the work, he's there pictured with Mary Schweitzer. Now, she's a theistic evolutionist. I think she's a truly Christian woman. I've seen the testimony. I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt, although I disagree with her worldview on origins. Jack Horner said it's unimaginable to find soft tissue. It's just assumed everything had been fossilized. More extraordinary yet was the next find in neighboring parts of the dinosaur bone. This is the T-Rex femur, thigh bone. Out popped the blood vessels, says Schweitzer. I said, I don't believe it. That's not possible. It was one of those goosebump moments. Horner and his team knew that the blood vessels should not exist in fossilized bone. Are these second-rate scientists? No, Jack Horner was the inspiration for the character in the first Jurassic Park movie in 1993, played by Sam Neill, the Hollywood actor. A legend in the dinosaur paleontology world, one of the top scientists in the world, and because he's so senior, they couldn't argue with it. And Mary Schweitzer, when she presented this work to him, she said, I didn't believe it until we'd done the experiment 17 times. And do you know what he said? Mary, the creationists are going to love you. Now, every year now, we find, or the scientific community finds and publishes material like that in bones of dinosaurs and other creatures considered to be millions of years old. We're finding pigments like heme and hemoglobin, biliverdin, porphyrins, melanins. We're finding connective tissue proteins like collagen and elastin and laminin, keratins that would make up bone and so on. And you can sequence those things and you can see the amino acid sequence compared to modern creatures. This is against the millions of years. This is not possible to explain in terms of millions of years. There is no chemical explanation, biochemical explanation for how that can last millions of years. They find DNA. DNA and proteins can't last millions of years. At the upper limit, experiments have been done where, with the most generous conditions. At even 20 degrees Celsius, there should be no DNA after 2,500 years. Yet we find DNA in bones considered to be tens of millions of years old. At 10 degrees, that's pretty cool. That's assuming it never gets hotter than 10 degrees in the summer. Yet 20,000 years is your upper limit. You see what the problem is? We're finding this every year and published. And you know what they say? It's what creationists predicted they would say after they had to realize that they could no longer claim it was contamination. Oh, well, there must be some method for preserving soft tissue for millions of years we don't yet understand. But that's another rescue device, isn't it? Like Ortscloud. That's saying, I'm not going to go where the evidence leads. I'm going to just appeal to some imaginary future discovery that will explain my problem. If you go where the evidence leads, this is powerful evidence for a young Earth, thousands, not billions of years. Now, I've done that pretty quickly. I know I've talked like 16 to the dozen rapidly, but I hope you got the gist. The upper limits here are upper limits. They're not ages, they're maximums. So the ages could be much less. So 10,000 years for short period comets, not 4.6 billion years for the age of the solar system. I would say weeks, months at most. Probably I'm being generous. It should be days or weeks. How long does it take for concrete to set, man-made rock? Just a few hours. Well-preserved fossils, weeks or months at the outside. Dinosaur soft tissue, 10,000 years at the outside. Well, friends, that's some scientific evidence for the young age of the Earth. But that's not proof. I would never talk about this as proof of the Bible's history. What I say is it's evidence that's wonderfully consistent with the Bible's historical time frame, but it's massively contradictory to the billions of years time frame. We can't prove what happened in the past. We weren't there. And unless you have an eyewitness testimony, oh, but we do, you don't know how old things are. So, what about Scripture? I think this also says no to evolution. This is a good way to sort of round up our morning, I think. You know, some people say, well, six-day creation, really? I mean, I agree with you on evolution, but really that's a bridge too far. And yes, there are many different points of view on the age of things when it comes to days of creation. But if you look at Scripture, it's not just a case of looking at the days of creation, each with the word evening, morning, and number, and contextual clues that in any language would indicate 6 days. Let's not even look at that. Let's just look at a simple argument like this that says, in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So here in the Ten Commandments, God says he worked 6 days. We're to rest, or the Israelites were to rest for a day after working 6 days, because that's what he did in creation. If these are 6 indefinite periods on which he created, or 6 long periods of millions of years, or there are 6 actual days with periods of time in between each day, then what becomes of the logic of this command? It breaks down. It completely breaks down. And let's be clear at this point. You may or may not know this, but there is no word for cosmos or universe in the Hebrew language. You have to convey it using a figure of speech called a merism. And this is what this is saying. In 6 days the Lord made the cosmos. Heaven and earth means cosmos. That's the only way you can convey it in the Hebrew language. He made the whole cosmos in 6 days. And merism is a figure of speech we use in our own languages. So in English, flesh and bone means the whole human body. It doesn't just mean the skin and the bones and none of the other body organs. I've searched high and low, you say to your wife or someone in your household when you're missing your smartphone or your wallet, and she says, you foolish person, you've only searched the attic and the basement? No, you know that high and low is a merism. It's a figure of speech meaning I've searched everywhere. You take two opposites, bring them together, and that conveys everything in between. Young and old alike enjoyed the festival. That doesn't just mean the tiny tots and the old folks enjoyed the festival. It means everybody enjoyed the festival. The Bible uses merisms. I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last, says the Lord Jesus in Revelation 22. If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, you are there. I think that's a merism. You may disagree. It's conveying that you can't get away from God. He's everywhere you could be. He's not just in those two places located. He's everywhere you could go. You can't escape from him. And that's what we see in Scripture. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He did it in 6 days. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth. He made the universe, the cosmos, in 6 days. something to think about. But more importantly, let's look at how the New Testament writers treated Genesis. We can see many, many verses on this, and you want to find out more. My book, Evolution of the Christian Faith, that I showed you earlier, that has a lot of discussion on this sort of thing. Christ taught the earth was only as old as the first humans. For example, of many, when he was teaching Pharisees and others that divorce was not God's plan, it was only because of their sinful nature and their unbelief that divorce was allowed, he starts giving, in a sense, a Christian definition of marriage. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. Mark's Gospel, Matthew 19, has a parallel passage. And he says, for this cause a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, the two shall become one flesh. Jesus in that passage is quoting from Genesis 1:27, as this does, and also bringing it together with Genesis 2:24. He's not seeing Genesis 1 and 2 as two contradictory creation accounts. He's bringing them together to provide a holistic teaching on marriage. But notice what's incidental to this statement. That human beings, male and female, Adam and Eve, been there since the beginning of creation. Not a long time after the creation. Elsewhere we see this kind of thing. Here in Luke's Gospel, chapter 11, the context is that people have always given the prophets of God, his representatives, his spokespersons, a hard time. The people of Israel often rebelled and they killed and they murdered their own prophets. And God kept sending prophets. And Jesus said that the blood of all the prophets which was shed from the foundation of the world may be required of this generation. From the blood of Abel to the blood of Zachariah. Abel represents the first prophet. Jesus calls him a prophet. It's one of the reasons Cain murdered him, because his brother had a prophetic ministry, in a sense. Brought the right gift, and Cain didn't. Abel is the first prophet, and then you've got Zechariah bookending that whole Old Testament period, one of the last prophets. Ever since the foundation of the world, that's been going on. Foundation in the Greek of the cosmos. Okay? Now I could show you many other verses that say things like God has spoken by the mouth of all his holy prophets since the beginning of time, or from of old, and other such verses. What we're really saying is that Jesus and the New Testament writers believe Genesis as history. But if you stretch out human history, or rather if you compress cosmological history from 13.8 billion years to a single 24-hour day, then man arrives on the scene a fraction of a second before midnight. Because the universe is billions of years old, man, as we know him today, a couple of 200,000 or 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, that's insignificant. It's the very tail end of history. But no, Jesus is looking back thousands of years, I think about 4,000 years, to the beginning of creation. Man is only a few days after the beginning of the cosmos, of the earth, and that's at the very beginning of creation. It's the very foundation of the world. It's the very beginning of time. Romans 1:20 says God's attributes have been clearly seen since the creation of the world. It says the same. People have been there to see God's attributes in creation. But also, think about this, and this takes me back to the first talk. A God, and I put it with a small g, who would use millions of years of death and suffering to create life, he's not clearly seen. So if God had made a world over millions of years, that could make it seem like he was not knowledgeable enough to make it quickly, or that he didn't have the power to create it quickly. And the fact that he would put up with billions of deaths of creatures during the process of changing this to this would look like he's not wholly good. It would appear that he's indifferent to suffering, or at least, if not indifferent, maybe even an ogre, because he says it's very good at the end. The attributes of God would be changed. I like what Wayne Grudem says here, although Wayne Grudem is probably an old earther. I did correspond with him at one point. He read my book very generously over a Saturday, and he said, well, I'd have to check out all the references before I agree to endorse or commend your book, but I know he's with me on critiquing evolution. I know he's probably not with me on the age of the earth, but he does say something useful here in critiquing theistic evolution. Instead of the straightforward biblical account of God's creation, the theistic evolution view has something like this. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds. And after 387,492,871 attempts, God finally made a mouse that worked. You get the point. You know, God knows how to create things immediately. Let the earth bring forth the living creatures. God speaks and things happen. You know, when Jesus stood up on the stormy lake, when they raised, "Don't you care we're going to drown, Lord?" And he stands up in the boat and he commands the elements, "Peace, be still." And about half an hour later, things had gradually died down and the disciples were amazed. Hang on, did I get that right? No. Immediately there was a great calm, and that's why they were astonished. He commanded the winds. Who is this that even the wind and waves obey him? Well, this is the Lord of glory. This is God in human flesh. This is the Creator as a man, fully God, fully man, who made everything and commands the elements. He doesn't need time. Doing things by speaking reveals his glory. And let me bring this to a close. Belief in those long ages of sin and death and misery and decay and emotional anguish prior to Adam contradicts the Bible's teaching, and it undermines the gospel. This is reinforcing what I've said earlier. You see, as you look at this world, it's a beautiful world, but it's not perfect. We know it's groaning and laboring like a woman in childbirth waiting for its deliverance. As Christians who believe in a real creation, a perfect world, fallen because of sin and cursed by God, but one day going to be redeemed. The redemption of the creation is tied up with the glorious liberty of the children of God. As you read this passage in Romans 8, it's talking about a renewed, restored creation where the curse is removed. But if I'm looking at that, even as a Christian with evolutionary or long-age glasses, where death is part and parcel of the process of time's creation of man, then I'm not going to have a right understanding of what I'm looking at. This is a crucial issue for the church. I've already gone through this, so I won't labor the point. But friends, let me picture it like this. A perfect world in the beginning, a very good, morally and physically perfect world, intruded by sin and therefore death and decay. This is a world that we're living in now, and yet it's subjected to futility, says Paul in Romans 8, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. What is the hope? Of its restoration, which is tied up with our liberation ultimately, and the resurrection of our bodies, and being in the presence of Jesus, reigning in a new heaven and a new earth. Okay? These are mind-blowing, wonderful things. But that new heaven and earth is meaningless without the biblical foundation in a literal Genesis. I've given a whole chapter to that in my book, Evolution of the Christian Faith. You know, do you look forward, not just because you'll be in the presence of your Savior and a presence where you won't deal with your wretched sin, but do you look forward to a place where there will be no more death, no sorrow, no crying? Of course you do, Christian. No more pain. For the former things are passed away. Why? Because God's going to remove the curse. We need this bookend, don't we? We need to see where it's headed. We know the end of the story. We can rejoice in this wonderful gospel and this wonderful future. The Christian worldview, in a sense, is founded on creation. It doesn't mean you can't believe the Christian message if you hold to old earth or billions of years or full-blown evolution, but you will have inconsistencies. You will find it very hard to defend that position in the public square. You will find it very hard to keep faith when you're miserable and you wonder why you're suffering, if you believe that suffering was part and parcel of God's process and part of his intention going back millions of years. No, stand firm on the authority of the Word of God. Convince, rebuke, exhort, with all long-suffering and teaching, those who bring a contrary doctrine. And do what Jude says in his epistle. Be prepared to contend earnestly for the faith once for all delivered to the saints. Do it with humility, do it with grace, but make sure you do it. So I would ask you to consider getting equipped with this magazine. I believe in this magazine. Am I prejudiced and biased? Absolutely 100%. I think it's a good magazine. But I was getting this for years before I joined the ministry in 2001. This magazine's quarterly, it's full color. I know a few of you know about it. Some of you have been looking at it. A subscription today gives you print and digital subscriptions 4 times a year, and that's 360 Rand. If you do it for 3 years, you get a saving. You get free gifts with this. If you want to not get a print subscription, because you don't trust your South African Postal Service, get a digital subscription. There's some saving there. Those are in red. And by the way, you might be interested in this book, Defending Genesis, which is some past wonderful articles of the Creation magazine. That's a great book. You can use this digital sub also to share with others in your home on different digital devices. I admit I'm old-fashioned. I like the smell and the touchy feeling of paper. But if you're a person who likes reading on devices, go for it. One testimony. This person says, the Creation magazine's priceless. It's brought me so much joy and blessing over the last 20 years, I can hardly believe it. It's opened a door of ministry to me, for me and my wife, that is extremely wonderful for us to be involved with. We love to see testimonies of like that. And we do have a number over the years. So sign up today. Go away with a free back issue. Go away with other freebies if you sign up for 3 years. Talk to Robert about that. We had a conference some years ago. I organized it. There's 16 people's talks from that conference. Very interesting stuff. Very edifying on science and archaeology and history and the Bible. And that's all on MP3s. 14 talks on that USB stick. You get that for free. So Robert's going to pass around with a friend or two those forms just to save a bit of time. If you want that magazine, you just fill in your details. You tick your right box, 1 or 3 years. And then you tear off the slip on the right-hand side. Keep that and take it to the book table, and you can get your free gifts and make sure that you get sent that magazine. You can pay by all sorts of means, credit card, EFT, that's like a bank transfer, isn't it? And probably check and cash if you are still, like me, a bit 20th century. So, I'm going to flash these up. These are I'm not going to discuss them. They're all good resources. These are ones to look at if you're interested in the age of the earth issue. This doesn't just deal with that, but that's an extremely good one. Evil is Achilles' heels, both as a book and a DVD. I think I'm going to be unfaithful to my colleagues who design it. I think it's a very poor cover, but it's a brilliant book inside and very well illustrated. I just think that's a pretty dull, uninteresting cover. Sorry, guys. Examining the case for millions of years. I haven't mentioned ice cores. I haven't mentioned glaciology. I have talks on the Ice Age. But if you want to find out more, brand new book, The Frozen Paradox, Ice Cores versus Deep Time. That's also good. I mentioned that earlier. Did I mention that earlier? That's also good. Testimonies of PhD scientists, but it has things that reference the age of the earth. So enough from me. You've been very, very patient. You've been very gracious in listening to this Englishman for 3 sessions on a Saturday morning when you could have been watching the Springboks, apparently. I'm very grateful. I wonder if, what time is it? You want to go to lunch, but is anyone burning to ask a public question? I'm happy to take 2 or 3 before I step down. If not, that's fine. You can come and talk to me. Okay.
I just wonder, how do you read Revelation when there's lots of imagery and metaphorical language?
Well, that's a good question. In our ministry, we are made up of people. We're a parachurch, non-denominational ministry, and we have people from many different church backgrounds and denominations, and we have different theological opinions. If you looked at all the people working for us around the world, we won't all agree on the mode of baptism. We won't all agree on the gifts of the Holy Spirit or church government or some of those areas where Christians who are sound believers famously disagree. And eschatology, end times, is one of them. We all believe Jesus is returning, but the timing of the millennium and that sort of thing, we don't go into that because that's not what God's called us to. And so, yes, I have my opinions, and others in this room will have their opinions. I do think Revelation is important. It's the other bookend of the Bible. If you don't read Revelation, then it's a bit like reading a novel and not finding out what happens at the end, which is strange. I do think when it comes to future things, your protology, what you do with the beginning of all things, how you understand Genesis affects your eschatology, particularly when you get to chapters 21 and 22 of Revelation. That's really beyond when we're thinking about the millennium, the nature of it, the timing of it, whether there's a rapture, whether there's a tribulation, and how you go through it, and all that sort of thing, which Christians of many different ages have sincerely held, godly men and women have sincerely held different opinions. But we all agree Jesus is returning, and we need to be ready for that. And so that's our focus in our ministry. Not because that's not important, but because if we were to start taking a position on that, we'll disenfranchise a whole bunch of people who like the message but don't like what we're saying about Revelation. You might think that's a cop-out, but it's actually a case of keeping your focus. So sorry not to fully satisfy you there, but it's certainly very important. Anybody else?
So I have one question. It's, well, I've heard that some people say that the people before Noah's Ark were a lot bigger than we are now. And some people say that they've found Noah's Ark. And what you're thinking of, like, why are people now, if it's true, why were people then a lot bigger than we are now?
Okay, good question. Robert, do we have the book Flood Fossils downstairs? The big, colourful book called Flood Fossils. Okay, there's a book down there. It's a sort of coffee table book. It's landscape format, Flood Fossils. That's brilliant on Noah's Ark, by the way, for anyone who's interested. It's also brilliant on fossils and other things. Do I believe people were definitely bigger than we are now before the flood? I don't know. Certainly, we have people who are giants today. I remember in the Guinness Book of Records as a child being interested in Robert Wadlow, who reached 8'11". I'm not quite sure what that is in centimetres or metres, but it's pretty tall. It's probably about, 7 metres or something. Sorry, not 7. It's probably about 3.5 metres tall, something crazy. And we look at the Old Testament, we see that there are giants there. Even in the post-flood world, the conquest of Canaan sort of period, you've got Goliath, you've got the family of Goliath that are tall, 6 fingers and 6 toes. That's really interesting because a mutation that causes giantism also leads to polydactyly, multiple fingers and toes. We know that's today. So that's a fact medically. So that's really fascinating to see something that corroborates that in the Bible. So giantism, yes. Og, king of Bashan, famously had a bedstead that was very, very big. Now, that doesn't prove he was as long as his bedstead, but clearly it seems to indicate he was also very big. And there's a Rephaim, and there's references to the sons of Anak and things in the Bible. It's a big subject. It's fascinating. Do I believe everyone before the flood was big? I don't think the evidence is supporting that. When you look at the fossil record, you're mostly, when you're finding human fossils, looking at evidence of people post-flood. It's true. So any Homo fossils, Homo heidelbergensis or Homo erectus or Homo neanderthalensis, anything Homo pretty much would be seen as a descendant of not just Adam, but also of the people migrating from Babel. Lots of them are deliberate burials. And they're not substantially bigger than people today. Okay? We don't have definite, certain fossils of humans from before the flood. So I'm not sure we have evidence of pre-flood humans in the fossil record. There are good reasons why that would be. I haven't got time to explore that with you, but there is a chapter in the Creation Answers book, that red book with the question mark. But giants pre-flood, post-flood, part of the world today, that's a fact of life. And often it's the mutations that cause that giantism cause other defects. So they're not necessarily healthy people. They have growth hormone problems. They have problems maybe with a thyroid. They have other issues. They don't live so long. So it's no advantage. I don't think a person, the size range of people we have today, biomechanically is about the optimum. If you double my height, you can't double me and keep my same proportions. Otherwise, I would collapse under my own weight unless you substantially increase the girth of my femur and my tibia and my fibula and my backbone. You have to increase the size of those because when you increase unit length, you cube the volume and therefore you cube the rate, the weight. You with me? So a person double my height is not double my weight. Vastly greater. And I don't think biomechanically that is a good, healthy condition. Okay. Question at the back there. I think we'd better make this the last one, simply because you've got dinners and things waiting, but you can come and talk to me.
What shape do you think the ark was? Was it the cuboid shape that you used, or the shape that Answers in Genesis used that looks more like a boat?
Okay, were you here in the last session?
Yes.
You were, okay. So the ark was 10 times as long as it is high, and it was like a barge shape. I've met Tim Lovell, who was the one ultimately who designed the ark that Answers in Genesis use. I knew him, I met him before he ever went to work. He's Australian actually, before he went to work with Answers in Genesis. I was very interested in a lot of his research. It's very well done. But I respectfully disagree with his shape of the ark, and there's a very simple reason. I know he's got his reasons why he thinks there would have been a sort of sail at one end and a sort of keel at the other end to turn into the waves and so on. The problem with that is the Bible explicitly talks about a cubit window at the top. That's about, 24 centimeters. But if it was going to mention a cubic window, it would certainly have surely mentioned in the description the sail at one end and the keel at the other, because those are like getting on for half or a third to a half the full height of the ark again. So the fact that God would mention a cubic window, something that's a much smaller detail than a massive sail and keel, I don't personally hold to that design. That's my only reason. Okay. But otherwise, he's doing good work. So, yeah. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you again to the leaders of this church for inviting Creation Ministries International. Thank you so much for coming. And I'd love to have a bit more fellowship with you. Robert will be able to with friends, serve you on the literature, but try to make your purchases quickly before you go off to lunch, and then we will wend our way to the next meeting. We're in Hermanus tonight. How far is that, Robert, from here? About an hour's drive. Okay. God bless you.